Hello, and welcome everyone who's here with us tonight for this very special event. I would like to welcome friends, colleagues, first-time visitors to the library, those who haven't been in the library auditorium before tonight, and those who are about to experience their first ever Library That Made Me Live event. You are in for an absolute treat. I would also like to welcome the Chair of the Library Council, the Honourable Bob Debus, and the formidable State Librarian herself, Dr. Caroline Butler-Bowden. The State Library of New South Wales stands on the timeless sandstone of Gadigal country. We acknowledge the many Aboriginal peoples and nations across the state as the ancient and ongoing custodians of their unceded lands, waters, and skies. We remember that this place sits on Gadigal country and is built from it. The sandstone that was mined from below now forms the library's walls, but it was once the soft sand on which ancestors walked. We offer our profound respects to the many generations of Aboriginal elders, leaders, storytellers, warriors, creators, and healers. We are honoured to hold their stories, languages, and histories here at the library. Before I move any further, I also want to utter a phrase that I don't get to say very often. We're live across New South Wales. I want to welcome everyone who is tuning in through our live stream from their local libraries. It's absolutely wonderful that you're able to join us. My name is Philippa McGuinness. I'm the editorial and publishing lead at the library. I'm editor of the library's magazine Open Book. I love a prop, that's what it looks like. And I'm the co-editor with Richard Neville of the library's 200th anniversary book, The Library That Made Me, 200 Years of the State Library of New South Wales. That's a bit heavier, but in every sense in some ways, but it's a wonderful book. On Friday night, just this past Friday, the library launched the program to mark our 200th anniversary. As you'll see, and I encourage you to pick up a copy of the program or check it out online, it is packed with events, performances, exhibitions, publications, special commissions, calls for community engagement, and more. This all started in February 1826 when 10 prominent Sydney gentlemen met in a pub down the road and decided to set up a subscription library for the colony. But really, it was for prosperous white men just like them. From our perspective here tonight, in between a sandstone building named after David Scott Mitchell and the Dame Mari Bashir reading room in the Macquarie Street building, as we sit on upholstered chairs above 5 floors of shelves containing books, manuscripts, letters, papers, photographs, negatives, microfilm, objects, audio recordings, ephemera, artworks, as well as petabytes, I'm not sure what that is, but it's a lot, petabytes of digitised material, where below or alongside galleries that make up the 7 free exhibition spaces and many, many working spaces for staff. So it might seem that the collection and the buildings that it's housed in and the people who look after the collection were an inevitable outcome of this first meeting. If we take a broader view, could we have predicted 2 centuries or a century ago that this would become the grand public institution that it is, devoted to learning and research, democratic, open to all, committed to expanding the collection to reflect the experiences of women, Indigenous people, LGBTQI people, immigrants and others, with dedicated spaces for children, young people, a place that supports a network of public libraries across the state, all funded by government with the help of philanthropy. We could not have anticipated this. So this year, more than anything, is an opportunity to reflect on how we got here and to recognise that the road has been convoluted, fraught, and often contested. But what we realise more and more is that libraries matter. The project to be all the things we need to be for all the people of New South Wales, Australia, and even beyond is ongoing. It's interminable, and that's a good thing. We were honoured on Friday night when the Governor-General launched this book, and tonight we are really celebrating the book, which includes a short history of the library by Richard Neville, a brilliant and challenging essay about the history of the bronze doors at the front of the Mitchell Library, written by my colleague, Head of Indigenous Engagement, Damien Webb. There's a photo essay, but the bulk of the book are stories called The Library That Made Me, written by 60 contributors, starting with Michelle Arrow at A and ending with Marcus Zuzak at Z, with so many wonderful pieces in between. And 5 of the writers are going to be presenting their pieces to us tonight. So, back in 2021, when I had the idea that a column called The Library That Made Me would be a good addition to Open Book, what I found was that people jumped at the chance to reflect on their local library, a school library, a university library, a library of the imagination, or some kind of library that had been formative for them in some way. We've read stories that are funny, thoughtful, moving, profound, and the column became one of the most popular parts of the magazine. So it's gratifying that The Library That Made Me has gone on to become a kind of a brand. Last year, and you will have seen this as you walked in, the library initiated an extraordinary photographic commission, sending photographers to libraries across the state, from Bega to Brewarrina, Walgett to Wagga Wagga. I just wanted to work all those names in somehow. And of course, across metropolitan Sydney. So as I said, you will have seen some of these as you walked in. There are big cubes on the Macquarie Street forecourt with all these photographs and stories from people who have shared their own stories of the library that made them, and you can do it too. There's a portal online where we're inviting people to share their own stories, either in words or you can leave a voice recording. And all these stories will become part of the library's collection. But tonight you've come along to listen to stories from this extraordinary lineup live. You're going to hear about the extraordinary legacy, sometimes tragedy, discovery, change, family, curiosity, and even football. But each one celebrates the value of libraries and the connections that they bring, often in very unexpected ways. So we're not going entirely alphabetically. We're starting with Dr. Kate Evans, who was the first ever contributor to the Library That Made Me series. She jumped at the chance when I asked her to do this, and as with every piece that I've commissioned, I never know what I'm going to get, but they're always wonderful. So many of you will recognise Kate's voice, but I'll tell you a little bit about her before I invite her to the stage. She's a radio producer, a presenter, and critic. She joined Radio National in the 1990s and has worked on a range of historical programs, but most recently has specialised in literature as co-host of The Bookshelf since 2018. You might have seen her in action at literary festivals, and she has contributed a major essay to the book Pix, the magazine that changed everything, that is inspired by the exhibition just out there, which was published late last year. What Kate wrote in the very first library that made me led to something that is pretty special. So I'm thrilled to invite her to the stage now.
Thank you so much, Pip. I feel extremely honoured to be part of this book and indeed this project, and quietly delighted as I was reading the other library that made me essays in this book over the weekend to discover that I'm not the only person to mention Dapto Public Library. It gets 2 mentions, and it's not even one of my 6 siblings, so I was very thrilled about that little moment. So this is what I wrote and what I'm going to read for you. Dapto Public Library, see also Fisher Library, see also Mitchell Library Reading Room, see also card catalogues, see also finding new or maybe an old world. I've started this reflection in 3 different ways, in 3 different libraries, trying to work out what it is I'm trying to pin down when thinking about what libraries have done to me and for me. It's made me reopen boxes of research papers, do online catalogue searches, try to find photographs of buildings since demolished. It has forced me to look through folders of copied papers and photographs, to find handwritten notebooks and to notice marginalia. Tell Jane, Royal Tour menu. Show Ian, Great Fleet pics, not to mention phone numbers of people whose names I don't recognise at all. What am I looking for? Is it a memory? Is it an argument? Is it a way of experiencing the world? I've decided to ditch the obvious card catalogue, the one with the origin story. Library, see Dapto Public Library, see also Dapto Primary School Library, see also story of tiny woman in floral shift with large pile of books. Despite the satisfaction of the old working class kid gets to university narrative, I decided that card was one we'd all seen before too. University, see Fisher Library, see View Over a Park, see New Life, see also What Next? Because really, it's a combination of wide desks in a beautiful space and a particular set of catalogue drawers that shaped me as a thinker and a researcher. And they're all in the reading room at the Mitchell Library. This is the library that not only changed me, it remains my image of what a library is and can be. It's also probably why, as I read books to deadlines every week in my job as a broadcaster, reviewer, arts journalist, my preferred method is to sit at a wide table in the rather vain hope of evoking a calm space in the midst of work and domestic chaos. My own haphazard pile of books and paper lean precariously towards the ordered shelves I long for, the basement levels that really would make life a lot easier if only they could be tunnelled out. Because early in my research life, a master's in public history, a PhD, work as an academic researcher, and later a TV researcher for a big history project, I discovered the delights of the card catalogue at the Mitchell. Preserved as part of its bequest, but preserving too the work of individual librarians, both ordered and surprising, constrained, yet able to open up entire worlds of ideas. I used to investigate any new area by taking out entire drawers, sitting at a table and reading through every entry under that subject. Because what it revealed was a changing world, new or helpfully old taxonomies of knowledge and highly specific references. And I'll confess I had to do some more research just a few months ago and I still did it. It still works even though there are online catalogues to be had. What that card catalogue did, though, it brought me into the sphere of librarians whose handwriting I came to recognise, even if I never knew who was who and which one really was Ida Leeson, who I'd read about, whose hands were all over those cards. Photograph, see photographer, see photograph, see photography, see photo engraving, see also chalk plate processes. So, something, 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 see also inebriate's home. I wish I could remember what took me there. I do remember that I was chasing various institutions at one point for histories of the homeless and destitute or those in quarantine when I found the card that said, see also inebriate's home. Just think of the historical and cultural work that that phrase offers. For years, I was working on the history of journalism and then on the history of press photographers in Australia. I remember reading the papers of one journalist from the late 19th century. There were 4 boxes of papers of his life and work covering the years 1888 to 1908. They are, by the way, the papers of William B. Daly in the Mitchell Library. That's just for the record. But reading them, I knew when Queen Victoria had died in 1901 because suddenly letters were edged in black. A reminder of how tactile and physical is the work of research, the materiality of it, the press of a pen into paper from a century before. But this one stays with me because in the midst of tracking a career and trying to understand press workers, I was caught up in letters from his sisters in stories of an affair, abortion, the legitimacy or not of his daughter, a divorce scandal, and the oddity of the fact his wife was hardly ever referred to by name, but instead was called baby by the family. We can all pause and go, ick, at that one. But what's the point of that anecdote? It has stayed with me. It haunts me in the same way that looking at historical photographs, I came to always notice the characters at the side, the figures in the crowd who'd seen the camera, the kid with no shoes climbing a pole, the men in street scenes with toddlers on their hip, the woman with the defiant jawline. All that detail that helps animate the past, but also all that material, all those stories that are inside these libraries that have made me. It's that mix of order, catalogue, listed, indexed, put into reading and research guides, and the wildly eclectic, surprising, personal, contradictory, willful, astounding stories that can be found there that show me some small part of what libraries can do, what they have done for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. I've never heard that read out loud, even though Kate has recorded it, and that was an absolute thrill. And I can feel the power of the card catalogues that are the Mitchell Library Reading Room is above it. I'm really thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Shankari Chandran. She is the author of 5 novels, including Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens, which won the 2023 Miles Franklin Literary Award, as well as Safe Haven and Song of the Sun God, which I think everyone should read, as well as all her books. Her most recent book is Unfinished Business. She is about to come up here, but I want to say that Shanks seems to know everyone and is one of the warmest, most collegial people you could hope to meet. You will see in the book that Joy Lai, my colleague, and I photographed Shanks in an Indian grocery store, not Sri Lankan, in Kalara. And such is her warmth and friendliness that I swear she knew every person who walked through that door. Let's welcome Shanks in the same way tonight.
Thank you, Pip, for that very warm welcome. I feel very soothed by Kate's voice, so I feel ready for this now. My footsteps slow when I pass a library, any library. I'm pulled inwards to its endless stories and the possibilities they hold. The public library of a country houses that nation's stories, even the contested ones. It is a monument to the storytelling we call history. The political history of Sri Lanka is especially contested. Which race arrived on the island first? Which warring faction committed the most atrocities? How many people died and how many remain missing? These are the narratives we still fight over. New ones have emerged. How corrupt was the previous regime? How many billions did they steal? How much do we owe China? And how many children will starve as a result of it? Libraries hold stories, but for me, one library also began a story. My novel, Try Time at Cinnamon Gardens, was inspired by the burning of the Jaffna Public Library. It uses this act of cultural erasure to explore racism in my ancestral home, Sri Lanka, and my chosen home, Australia. The Jaffna Public Library sits in Jaffna, Yalpanam, the ancestral capital of the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. It was constructed between 1953 and 1959, and its domed ceilings and gleaming white stucco walls stood proudly over the city, more like a palace than a library. It stored one of the largest archives of Tamil culture in the world. At its height, the collection contained 100,000 books, ancient manuscripts, and historical records about the Tamil civilization in Sri Lanka. It is, or it was, a place of almost mythical cultural significance to the Tamil people. In 1981, the Jaffna Public Library was burned to the ground by mobs and Sri Lankan government security forces. 2,000 years of Tamil culture, history, and language were destroyed. Some texts were the only copies in existence and have been lost forever. The Jaffna Public Library told a story about the place of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. The political authorities of that time wanted to suppress this narrative. Burning the archive was a quick and conclusive way to do it. For many Tamils, this biblioclasm was the culmination of decades of laws that disempowered the Tamil people. And it foreshadowed the civil war that was to come 2 years later. That war led to the forced migration of Tamil people to many parts of the world, and for my family, to Australia. It also led to the internal displacement of hundreds of thousands of Tamil people. I was born and raised in the Tamil diaspora. For decades, my parents were afraid to return to Sri Lanka because of my father's political activism. We moved to London and then Australia, where I was raised, in 1977, a few years after the end of the White Australia policy. I call Australia my chosen home because I have left many times and I always long to return. I am deeply happy and connected to both people and place here. From the strength and safety of Australia, I use fiction to interrogate the injustices that drove my family from one home and challenged them to create another. Fiction allows me to assert myself in the present and to understand how that present has been shaped by the past. At a recent literary panel, someone asked me if I felt my fiction was constrained by my ethnicity and our history. This was my answer. I stride into the future with stories, and it is vital to me that I take my history with me. I am uplifted, not burdened by it. At the same panel, a reader told me that my latest novel's assertion of racism in Australia was deeply offensive. I smiled politely and said, I find racism deeply offensive and destructive. I wanted to add, but didn't. your local library will have a copy of White Fragility. When the Jaffna Public Library was burned, I became bereft of a history, an archive of the past that helped anchor my place in the present. It is a moment in time that I have memorialized in all my writing. As a writer, all my work returns to the burning of books and stories. I cannot let go of the burning of books, the burning of the bodies, and the burning of the truth that followed. Through fictional stories about Sri Lanka, I have tried to record our path to war and the terrible mistakes made by both sides. Through fiction, I've tried to understand how so many were killed and why there will not be justice for the living or the dead. On my last trip to Sri Lanka in January 2019, I returned with 3 generations of my family. We went to our ancestral villages and saw the continuing effects of the war. My parents took their children and grandchildren to all the places they had loved and left behind. We saw how much had been erased by genocide, how much of our history had been erased by the post-war rebuilding of the North. We took our children to the new Jaffna Public Library, built on the ruins of the old one. It is still a stately building, its architecture an homage to the original design, but its archive will never be the same. We assembled the Chandran grandchildren in front of the library and took a photograph of them with their grandparents, recounting some of the stories that had been destroyed. We whispered the words because although we were in the Tamil heartland, history had taught us to be afraid. We choked on the words because we felt the grief rise up through our bodies and threaten to overwhelm us. Finally, we pressed and we kissed the words into our children because the stories of their ancestors will help them write their own. Standing outside the new Jaffna Public Library, on the hard red earth of our ancestral homeland, I felt completely at home, while completely dispossessed of home. And I felt the yearning I always feel to return home to Australia and begin a new story.
Thank you, Shankari, for that incredibly powerful, beautifully expressed piece. Thank you. Our next guest is Grace Karskens. Grace is Emeritus Professor of History at the University of New South Wales, and she's a Fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities. She's a former Coral Thomas Fellow at the State Library of New South Wales, and she is the author of numerous landmark books, including The Rocks, The Colony, which won the 2010 Prime Minister's Literary Award for Non-Fiction, and People of the River. The portrait of Grace that appears in the book, taken by Joy Lai just above us in the Mitchell Reading Room, is, I think, one of the greatest shots ever taken in the reading room and shows not only what a great human Grace Karskens is, but why her approach to Australian history is so refreshing. Let's welcome her.
Pip, thank you. I'm glad you like that shot because I heard other people didn't. They were disapproving. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you here. And hello to everybody around New South Wales. It's lovely to see you. Now, I think this should be called The Library That Saved Me. And it's also, my little story is also about children's books that were banned. Yes. Opposite our school, on Windsor Road in Balcombe Hills in northwest Sydney, there stood an old weatherboard School of Arts. Inside it was dim and cool, and the roar of traffic muffled and faded. down some creaking wooden stairs, was a library. Just one room, lined floor to ceiling with books and filled with their comfortable, musty smell. Dust danced in the shafts of sunlight pouring in through the old sash windows. Well, Balcombe Hills in the 1960s, I don't know if any of you remember Balcombe Hills in the 1960s, but it was exploding. Thousands of new houses were rising on the old farmlands. Narrow roads were choked with fumy traffic. Schools were filled, bursting with children. New buildings of unrelenting dreariness were appearing on every corner. And I mean that, I remember it. We spent our lives waiting for lumbering buses, which were always late and always packed. I remember that first library in the old School of Arts as a kind of sanctuary, like stepping back momentarily to an earlier time. But best of all, it had books by Enid Blyton. We had lots of books in our house. Mostly they were heavy, dark tomes with incomprehensible Dutch titles. They were like dignified old relatives, kindly, but imparting a certain gravitas to our raw new brick veneer home. In my bedroom, carefully lined up on top of the wardrobe, was a set of Enid Blyton books, about 11 volumes, all hardbacks, with deep red covers. I'd been gifted them by a family that my mother knew. I loved those books, and I read them again and again. I was proud to be the owner of my own little library. Well, then in 1968, we got our very own library at Balcombe Hills. I was thrilled. It was modest, a single-level blonde brick building with a flat roof, big glass doors, scratchy industrial-strength green carpet, and fluorescent light. I'm sure you remember the libraries of the suburbs, but I was thrilled. Every Friday I borrowed 3 books, which was the limit. I read them over the weekend and brought them back on Monday. The children's section had a lot of good books, but there was no Enid Blyton. It was very puzzling. I desperately wanted to read more of her books. I wondered if our library was perhaps too small and unimportant to have them. So one day I decided to make my way to the big city, Parramatta. With its substantial buildings and smart department stores, Parramatta was the bustling centre around which still-forming satellite places like Balcombe Hills orbited. A trip to Parramatta was an outing, an event. You dressed up to go to Parramatta. The library there, in that great centre, was sure to have Enid Blyton, I reasoned. So I caught the bus after school and I found the library and I marched up the stairs and through the big, heavy, swinging glass doors. It was huge. Where were the children's books? I spied a librarian behind a desk, made a beeline for her, and mustering my most grown-up voice, asked confidently, "Do you have Enid Blyton books?" The librarian paused, leaned over the desk and over me, fixing me with a severely disapproving glare. "Certainly not," she barked crossly. I can't recall what else she said because my world was crashing around me and I was dying of shock and embarrassment. So I picked up my Globite school case and I fled. Terrible, isn't it? Well, it must have been about a year later that my dad, I think I was 10 or 11, my dad took me to the State Library of New South Wales in Sydney. Sydney! That fabled, faraway place with its cool, shaded streets between glamorous canyons of tall buildings, the gracious, tended parks and gardens, and everywhere glimpses of glinting water. Well, Dad was doing a metallurgy course at TAFE, and he needed a library to study. Walking with him into that magnificent, airy reading room, I gasped. It was a grand palace of books, like nothing I'd ever seen. There were books on every side, lining the walls on 3 levels. Light poured in from a vaulted glass ceiling and from rows of stained glass windows. It was like a church, actually. Elegant metal stairs led up to narrow balconies where you could wander and browse among the books until to your heart's content. And there were proper big desks, Kate, yes, big desks where you could read, and an air of hushed reverence. Dazed and happy, I wandered and browsed until eventually I spotted a book by Hans Christian Andersen. I pulled it out carefully and carried it down the steps, and I must have recovered from my encounter with a librarian at Parramatta, because before I sat down to read, I ventured up to the desk and asked the librarian if the library had any children's books. Notice I didn't mention you know who. Well, she nodded kindly, checked in a drawer of cards, and wrote down the title on a piece of paper for me. As I read it, a wave of wonder, a sense of uncanny, of magic whirled over me. For it was the very same book of stories by Hans Christian Andersen that I held in my hands. Miracles didn't happen to kids from Borkham Hills, and yet, among all those thousands of books, I had found the only book for children. I returned to the State Library and the Mitchell Library as a university student in the 70s, then as a freelance consultant, and later as a historian. When the Mitchell Library moved from its sequestered wing into what had previously been the reference library reading room, where I'd found the Hans Christian Andersen book all those years ago, I rejoiced. And over the past 5 decades, the wonder of that first encounter has only grown with each astonishing discovery that I've made in that place, and each recovery of lost stories, places, and truths. The Mitchell Library is our knowledge holding place, our labyrinthine memory palace, our mysterious trove of discovery and learning. I was right about the magic. I know it as our sacred place. Thank you.
A memory palace, hey? How about that? Thank you so much to Grace Karskens. I'm very pleased now to welcome Thomas Keneally, AO, who, as you know, is one of Australia's most distinguished writers. And as far as I know, he's probably the only person here tonight with a centre named after him, the Tom Keneally Centre at the Sydney Mechanics School of Arts, which is where we took his photograph for the book. Tom's first novel was published in 1964, and since then he's written fiction and non-fiction, including The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, Schindler's List, The Commonwealth of Thieves, and The People's Train. He has won the Miles Franklin Award, the Booker Prize, the Los Angeles Times Prize, and the Mondello International Prize. He's also a literary lion of the New York Public Library, and we love him at this one. So let's all welcome Thomas Keneally.
Thank you. It's an honour to be here with these young authors, each of them still finding their way, although I think Grace and Dr. Evans and Bruce and the others here tonight have found their way to a remarkable degree, and libraries always seem magical places to young writers. There is no doubt that during the torpor of Bob Menzies' Australia, in the 1950s. The State Library made a great impression on me as a place that transcended daily life and had mysteries it might teach me. A group of schoolboys used to come in from Homebush to the Sydney Town Hall for a weekly symphony concert. And the library was one place nearby that we regularly descended on. Far from being irreverent, we were anxious to imitate its solemnity and to honour its silence, which struck us as important to listen to. We were warned by civil and religious leaders of the time to expect atomic obliteration and the demonic triumph of communism. But these outcomes seemed almost too dramatic for the meat and potatoes reality of the suburbs we lived in. Separating into twos, we used to go looking for rare books on, say, toxicology or otters, or the forgotten but worthy power of verse, searching through the upper reaches where rare poetry books were lined up in squadrons. We didn't realise that books we could see on the shelves merely represented a multitude of others unseen down in the stacks. We had no idea that the structure we were in also housed letters, manuscripts, and other creative documents of the past. So this is how I first met up with the library. Elvis Presley was about to emerge onto the world stage, but we were the nerds of St. Patrick's College, Strathfield. Even though I was then making a serious assault on becoming what the Americans would call a jock, but in rugby league. God forgive me. For me, the State Library has never diminished in prestige, nor delivered less than it promised, unlike some other great institutions of the time. Now that I'm aged, I can see that it has given me a number of favours across a lifetime. One of the first pieces of research I stumbled on, one of the abiding mysteries of convictism, containing in the old Bailey session papers, which used to be kept downstairs in the library. It struck me from the brief trials convicts were given in the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales. 1 in 5 of all convicts were tried there, that the justice market proceeded to sentence very briskly. The accused might have as little as 5 to 10 minutes in court, which seemed grotesque given a sentence to New South Wales would be as good as eternal. That started me off on a lifetime interest in convicts. As for the sort of help the library can give, when I was writing a book on the life of Charles Dickens' 2 immigrant sons in Australia, which is really a favourite of mine, so if you do stumble on it and have nothing better to do, but you'll have something better to do, I'm sure, do read it. I read that here, in connection with the Dickens, the papers of Fred Bonney, who was Edward Plawn Dickens' boss on the giant leasehold property Mamba, out beyond the Darling River near Wilcannia. Fred Bonney was a small man with a passion for songbirds. He used to dispense bird feed to whichever wild and tame birds he met. The local Barkindji people called him Yellowbirds. In the 1860s, he made his own photographic plates, a chemical coup, and became the first person to film the indigenous group, a considerable group of whom camped on the Mamba homestead for protection against mounted police. Not long to go, kids. I'm nearly finished, and the voice may yet stand up. Bonnie gave various hut keepers at remote stations of the station letters that challenged the right of any police force, whether from Queensland, South Australia or New South Wales, to pursue wanted Barkindji Aboriginal people onto his land. He became an ethnographer in his own right and was sought out by scholars. His photographs, digitised and held in this library, hard to believe, isn't it? Makes you weep. And held in this library's connection, may be British in idiom, but are Barkindjian content. They are treasures that transcend any standard of value. Another instance of the value of the library's extraordinary resources became clear when I was researching the question of why the writer Miles Franklin is a hero in Serbia. I came across a little-known story from the First World War. A Scottish woman named Dr. Elsie Inglis created a number of all-female medical units to serve in the conflict. She was rebuffed most insultingly by the British Royal Army Medical Corps. But of course, Miles joined her and worked as a nurse in the all-women unit supporting the Serbian army in its war against the Austro-Hungarian allies of Germany. Franklin's 200-page written manuscript about this experience is an obscure glory from our history about the intersection between feminism, suffragettism, and the closed-mindedness of men. By various means, some of my own papers and documents are held in the library. I wrote once a very long novel, Schindler's List, on papers I stuck to pre-typed pages. I stuck to pre-typed pages, revision by revision, as a lot of my work at the State Library consists of long, glued, altogether palimpsest-like pages. If anyone is interested, these pages would show how people got by in the pre-computer days. I would be honoured if something of mine could one day creatively reward a researcher in the way the library and Frederick Bonney, for example, has honoured me. Bonney was a true anti-racist of his period, yet he hung on to 2,317 square miles of pastoral land. He made his own photographic plates to take pictures of Barkindji Madonnas and warriors. And it is entirely consistent with the riches I expected was here when I was first a dumb kid from Homebush wandering in after the symphony concert. If anyone ever had a sense that everything is written, everything worth telling is told, a day in the library will certainly cure it. In this library, beloved place.
Thank you so much, Tom. I've got tears in my eyes as well. The voice held up, but more than anything, the words do too. So thank you so much. Our final speaker tonight is Bruce Pascoe. Bruce is a Yuin, Bunurong and Tasmanian man and an award-winning author of literary fiction, non-fiction, poetry, essays and children's literature. He's the Enterprise Professor of Indigenous Agriculture at the University of Melbourne. He's best known for his work Dark Emu, a game-changing, mind-changing book, which won the 2016 Book of the Year in the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards, and Young Dark Emu. I've also added a little phrase because I was really keen to say the final word of it. He's also a farmer and grows Australian Aboriginal grains and tubers. Let's welcome Bruce Pascoe to the stage.
Thanks very much, Kate. Thank you for people for coming to a library. Thank you to my fellow writers for that rich entertainment. Thanks, young fella Tom, for always being so generous in both heart and mind. I'm writing a new book called The European Mind, which talks about wars around the world, the damage they do, the construction they do nothing about. And part of it is talking about a people who decided that in the management of the failed humanity, they would never go to war for land. And because I'm talking with people about this book, it stuns me that so few people guess which continent I'm talking about. You really could pick any library. Many provided seismic moments, but it's the days when you were young and raw that are indelible. I remember a stall at the University of Melbourne's Baillieu Library, and in the delusional privacy of plywood, I was morose, as only lovesick young men can be morose. I was studying for an economics degree because my father, twice failed in business, thought only accountants made money, and he wanted for my security. He overlooked the fact that I did not understand most of the fundamentals of economics. In fact, was actively resisting accepting the verity of their principles. I lived for books and writing and a particular girl who thought I was a nerd. She was correct, but I hadn't realised it yet. If you can't be with the one you love, read the first book you can find. I loved that song. So, wallowing in this gloom, I scoured the shelves and collected a dozen or so books of poetry. Christopher Brennan, Judith Wright, Dylan Thomas, Philip Larkin, E.E. Cummings, and settled in for a good wallow. I had heard of a book called Around the Boree Log, which some critics claimed explained the Australian condition. I thought that Christopher Brennan's girlfriend being run over by a tram was closer to the mark. But I was in total eclipse penumbra and dipped into all the books over a deliciously maudlin afternoon. I thought the verse in Around the Boree Log was clunky and inconsequential, but I stared at the cover, the imprint page, the spine, and realised that even this could be published. I had always imagined publishing poems and stories since I was 15, but now it was decided it would be my career, and I'd start with the most banal story of all, my family. Lovesick youths write maudlin, lovesick poems, so under the influence of Christopher Brennan, there was a lot of rain, darkness, and depression. A mate and I would take our love sickness to the darkest, stickiest inner city pubs, trying to be as dissolute as Brennan and Thomas, but we weren't athletic enough to deal with that sickness that was induced. Anyway, I knew I preferred the beach to the beat. As far as I could tell, no serious writer ever wrote about sunshine. Next time I went to the library for a depression fix, I couldn't believe that someone was in my stall. In my mind, it was a shrine to my failure to be an artist. But I found another place to indulge moon shadow and selected a book to accompany it down the crevasse. I selected Bill Posters Will Be Prosecuted. I read it in one sitting, but it was so unrelentingly jaunty I couldn't maintain my wallow, and anyway, no one has ever wallowed in a crevasse. They just keep falling. Apparently. But only Karl Kruszelnicki would know, and so far he hasn't said what is at the bottom of a crevasse or if wallowing is possible there. So while waiting for a definition from Dr. Karl, I went to footy training and thumped into the ball and yelled the sort of nonsense we were trained to yell. But even though I recommend the salutary effects of yelling in parkland in winter, on this particular evening, my heart wasn't in it. I wasn't good enough to play at any higher level than I had achieved by the age of 19, and I can say with authority because my teammates from that era still remind me of my proletarian skill set, those who are still alive. I had come to the conclusion myself because I realised that while attempting to take a chest mark, I was searching for the word to describe oak trunks wreathed in fog. As I spilled the ball, I realised my coach wasn't searching for the same word. Every Saturday night, us defeated footballers would go to a party, which involved a lot of alcohol, unobtainable girls, and music created by throwing a well-equipped kitchen into a stairwell. I would eventually slink off and go to a uni party where young men were wrapped in the arms of beautiful girls. There was unlimited cheap alcohol and budget shelf ennui. And all were listening to long playing records on 33 RPM. I would sit in rapture, pretending to drink, pretending no interest in the unobtainable girls, but capable of avoiding ennui. I was far too fit. I'd listen to Margaret Roadnight because she came from Melbourne, but I'd imbibe Cohen because my jaw dropped when he so insouciantly rhymed hair with her. When I hear the lyric, Jane came by with a lock of your hair, I bristle in anticipation of that audacious rhyme. Yes, that lonely stall in the Bayou had settled things for me. I no longer felt guilty about resisting the allure of double-entry bookkeeping or dropping chess marks. No, it was worse than that. I was a writer.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was just superb. I hope there's a tiny little plaque in that corral in the Bayou Library at the University of Melbourne. This felt like a really special evening, so I want you to join me again in thanking all our speakers. Kate Evans, Shankari Chandran, Grace Karskens, Thomas Keneally, and Bruce Pascoe. Let's give them a big round of applause.